The first snow of the season had come early to the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains, dusting the pine forest around the Linden Ridge Wildlife Rescue in a thin veil of white. The facility, a cluster of low wooden buildings and fenced enclosures tucked into a valley, was usually a place of order routine. Feeding schedules, medical checks, enrichment time, volunteers hosing down kennels and preparing specialized diets. But on that morning, the air carried an unusual tension, the kind that made even the seasoned staff walk a little faster and speak a little softer. Dr. Elena Novak, head veterinarian and co-founder of the rescue, stood just inside the intake barn with her arms folded against the cold. At 47, she had seen more than her share of injured, orphaned, and abandoned animals. Wolves hit by cars, foxes caught in illegal traps, owls with shattered wings from power lines. She had helped them all, some back to the wild, some into a life of permanent sanctuary. But today's call had been different, even by her standards. The wildlife ranger's truck reversed up to the barn doors, tires crunching over ice. When the engine finally sputtered off, the silence that followed seemed unnaturally loud. Two men in forest green uniforms stepped down from the cab, their faces lined with exhaustion. One of them, Ranger Ionescu, moved to the back and carefully unlatched the metal cage strapped in place. "Bear cubs," he had said on the phone, his voice tight. "Mother killed near the highway. The cubs were found climbing on her body, crying." He had spared her further details, and she had not asked. Now, as the cage door opened, Elena saw them properly for the first time. Two tiny shapes huddled in the farthest corner, pressed so tightly together they seemed like a single trembling ball of fur. They couldn't have been more than 10 weeks old. Their coats, which should have been glossy with health, were patchy and dull, flecked with mud and road salt. One had a faint smear of dried blood across his forehead. Not his own, and his eyes, too big for his face, kept darting toward every sound, wide with shock. The other cub was even smaller, almost half his brother's size. She lay half hidden beneath him, limp and unervingly still, her fragile ribs moving in shallow breaths. "Found him just off Route 14, Ionescu murmured, setting the cage carefully on the concrete. "Mother was too close to the road. We think she'd been coming back from the river with them when a truck hit her. By the time we arrived, a crowd had already gathered, people taking pictures. The cubs wouldn't leave her." Elena swallowed hard, pushing down the familiar wave of anger and grief. Emotion wouldn't help the two lives in front of her. Calm, methodical action would. "Let's get them inside," she said, her voice settling into a professional tone that always appeared when things were at their worst. "Quiet room, minimal noise. I want fluid set up, warming pads ready, and a full exam within the hour. Nobody goes in there unless absolutely necessary." The staff moved with practiced precision. The cage was carefully transferred into a small quarantine room at the back of the barn. The lights dimmed to a soft amber glow instead of harsh fluorescence. A thick layer of straw had already been laid out, alongside blankets warmed in the dryer. As the cubs were gently coaxed out of the cage, the larger one reacted instantly, a tiny rumbling growl, claws scraping the metal floor, body positioning itself between the humans and his limp sister. His attempt at threat display would have been almost comical in other circumstances, but here they were heartbreaking. This was a baby who had lost everything in a single night and was now prepared to fight an entire world he could not understand. "Easy, little warrior," Elena murmured, dropping her posture low, avoiding direct eye contact, letting her voice do the work that words could not. "No one's taking her away from you. We're just going to help." It took nearly half an hour for the team to get close enough to perform basic checks. The male cub's heartbeat thundered beneath his ribs, elevated but strong. He snapped weakly at the stethoscope, then, exhausted, simply pressed his head against his sister again as if willing his warmth into her body. The smaller cub's condition was more worrying. Dehydrated, chilled, and likely in hypoglycemic shock. She lay limp as a forecatheter was inserted, her tiny paw no larger than a human palm. "Names?" asked Mara, one of the senior keepers, softly as she adjusted the fluid line. They always named their rescues as soon as they came in. It made charting easier, but everyone at Linden Ridge knew it was more than that. Names were tiny promises. "You are someone not just a number. You matter, Elias. Elena said after a moment, looking at the larger cub. There was something stubborn in the way he refused to move aside, even when his whole body shook. And this little fighter is Nola. Elias and Nola, Mara repeated, writing the names on a whiteboard outside the room, alongside the date and their estimated age. 2 lives, seconds away from disappearing in a world that would never have noticed. Now they existed in ink and concern, and whispered prayers between staff on coffee breaks. Over the next 24 hours, a grim pattern emerged. Elias refused to leave Nola's side. Whenever a keeper entered with milk formula or tried to encourage him toward a bowl, he would bark a hoarse little warning, then press himself even closer to his sister. He ate barely enough to stay upright. Nola, even with warm fluids and careful feeding through a syringe, hovered on the edge of consciousness. Any attempt to move Elias away from her, even by a few inches, sent him into a frantic whimpering panic that left both cubs' hearts racing dangerously. By the 3rd day, Elena stood outside their room, watching through the small glass window as Elias nudged an untouched bowl of milk away with his nose and curled tighter around Nola instead. His fur looked slightly better, his eyes a little clearer, but his weight chart told a different story. He was losing ground. He was choosing his grief, his need to protect, over his own survival. Trauma bonding, murmured Dr. Singh, the behavioral specialist who consulted for the rescue. He's anchored his whole world onto her. He won't fully accept help until he believes she's safe, and she won't stabilize unless he does. So we're stuck, Elena said quietly. Her life depends on his, and his depends on a promise we can't quite make, not in a way he understands. The rescue had dealt with orphan bear cubs before. There were protocols, manuals, case studies from other sanctuaries. But none of those pages knew Elias and Nola, didn't account for the way his tiny paw would reach out to touch her face every few minutes, as if checking that she still existed. None of them addressed a wild, desperate loyalty in his dark eyes when a stranger came too close. As evening fell, and the first stars began to prick the winter sky, Elena lingered at the window longer than she meant to. She had promised herself, early in her career, never to let a single case consume her. She had broken that promise more times than she could count. Behind her, the soft thud of heavy paws on concrete echoed down the corridor, followed by a low, curious huff. The sound brought a faint smile to her face even before she turned. She recognized that pattern instantly. It belonged to the largest, strangest, and perhaps most misunderstood resident of Linden Ridge, a dog who had once been called a weapon, and who now might be their last, improbable chance to save 2 bear cubs who didn't yet know how to live without a mother. Titan had come to check on her again, and with him, an idea she had long ago dismissed as impossible began to stir in the back of her mind. Titan did not so much walk as occupy space, every step announcing his presence without a single show of aggression. At just over 200 pounds, the massive blue Cane Corso was a kind of animal strangers assumed to fear. Thick neck, blocky head, jaws powerful enough to crush bone, paws like small plates tapping rhythmically against the floor. Visitors who saw him for the first time often instinctively stepped back, muscles tensing, eyes darting toward exit signs. They had seen dogs like him in movies, in stories about guard dogs and attack training and police raids. They expected bared teeth and deep, guttural snarls. What they got, instead, was a solemn Titan who moved with the careful deliberation of someone who understood just how much damage he could cause and had decided, resolutely, never to use that power again. Evening, Professor, Elena said softly as Titan's enormous head nudged against her elbow. He exhaled in a slow huff, then leaned his weight gently into her side, not enough to knock her off balance, but enough to anchor her. It was his way of saying, I see you. I know you're carrying too much. You're not alone. Titan had been many things in his life. The scars beneath his thick coat told a story he could not put into words. Raised as a status symbol by a wealthy man who believed power could be measured in leash length and bite force. Trained by handlers who rewarded aggression and punished hesitation. Kept in a concrete yard with cameras and motion sensors, a living deterrent with chain for a collar. He had done what he was taught until the day he hesitated. No one at Linden Ridge knew the full details of that turning point. only pieces pieced together from court reports and shaky phone footage. A delivery driver had collapsed in the courtyard on a sweltering summer day, victim of a heat stroke that turned seconds into a life-threatening emergency. Titan's owner had shouted commands from a balcony, ordering the dog to keep the unconscious man pinned. Instead, Titan had done something no one expected. He laid down beside the stranger, blocking the sun with his own massive body, licking the man's face until someone finally called an ambulance. The footage had gone viral. The scandal that followed, questions about illegal training practices and neglect, the ethics of turning dogs into living weapons, had ended with Titan being declared evidence and then, eventually, surplus. He was too old, too specialized, too risky to adopt out to an ordinary family. No one wanted the liability. No one except Elena, who saw in the footage not a liability, but a choice. She remembered the first time Titan had arrived at Linden Ridge, led off a transport van with 2 muzzles and a chain leash. His eyes had held the same tired resignation she had seen in too many animals, a quiet acceptance that the world was something that happened to you, not with you. It had taken months of patient work, positive reinforcement, and careful desensitization before his muscles stopped twitching at every sharp sound. Now, 3 years later, Titan was the unofficial guardian of the rescue. He padded calmly past foxes in kennels, ignored squabbling raccoon kits, and settled near the pens of the most anxious animals as if his sheer calmness could be shared through the air. He never barked without reason. He had learned that his size took care of intimidation on its own. Tonight, his amber eyes flicked from Elena's face to the lit window where Elias and Nola lay. He tilted his head, ears pricking forward, as if sensing the storm of worry behind the glass. "You hear them, don't you?" Elena murmured, scratching gently at the base of his ear. Titan's tail gave a slow, heavy thump against the floor. "You always do." Over the past year, a pattern had emerged. Whenever a new arrival came in with deep emotional trauma, a fox that paced in endless circles, a lynx that flinched at every shadow, a dog that refused to leave the corner of its kennel, Titan would appear. No one called him. He simply seemed to know, on some wordless frequency, where he was needed most. He would lie down outside the kennel or fence, body a quiet mountain of reassurance, gaze soft, breathing slow and steady. Sometimes the animals ignored him completely. Sometimes they snarled or hissed at him through the bars. Sometimes, though, something shifted. The pacing slowed. The flinching softened. A frightened nose would stretch forward, testing the scent of this enormous, silent presence. And little by little, calm would spread where chaos had lived. It was Dr. Singh who had first used the term co-regulation in Titan's file. "This dog has become a walking therapeutic device," the behaviorist had said, half amused, half awed. "He reads emotional states better than most humans I know. He moderates himself to match what the other animal needs. If they're terrified, he goes still. If they're withdrawn, he adds just enough curiosity to pull them out. It's like he's learned an entire language without anyone teaching him." And yet, for all his quiet miracles, there were lines even Titan had never crossed. His interactions had always been with animals of roughly similar size, other dogs, small wild mammals, occasionally a goat, or injured deer under strict supervision. He had never been inside a carnivore cub enclosure, never been asked to interact with something that would, one day, grow to be as strong and as potentially dangerous as he was. Elena had once entertained the idea in passing, introducing Titan to some of their more nervous lynx or wolf cubs. Maybe. Each time, she had rejected it. Too risky, too unpredictable, too far outside standard protocols. But now, watching Elias push away food to curl over Nola's frail body, seeing the numbers on her chart slide toward a point of no return, she felt the weight of every too risky decision pressing on her chest. Conventional methods were failing. Medical interventions could sustain, but not heal, what had broken in those 2 tiny hearts. Titan shifted closer to glass, his nose fogging a faint circle on the window. As he peered inside, he let out a sound, a low, almost questioning exhale that was not quite a whine, not quite a sigh. "You're going to make me say it out loud, aren't you?" Elena whispered. Behind the glass, Elias lifted his head as if he, too, had heard. The idea that had hovered at the edge of her thoughts for days finally stepped fully into the light. What if, instead of relying solely on human hands and human voices to reach these cubs, they let another animal try? Not a mother bear. They had none, and introducing another adult bear would be impossible. Not another cub. None were available, and Elias's protective desperation might turn even that into a disaster. A dog, though, a dog who understood what it was to lose a home, to mistrust humans, to carry training that had taught him the world was dangerous and confusing. A dog who had chosen once to lie down beside a helpless stranger instead of obey commands to harm. What if you could be their bridge? She murmured, more to Titan than to herself. Not instead of us. With us. She knew exactly how it would sound when she proposed it at the morning briefing. Irresponsible. Dangerous. Reckless. A lawsuit waiting to happen. No case studies. No precedent. No manual for 200-pound Cane Corso fosters abandoned bear cubs in any training library. But when a small hoarse cry echoed from a quarantine room, a sound that was not a growl, not a proper bear call, but a thin thread of panic and confusion, Titan stiffened, then looked back at her with an intensity that stole her breath. In his gaze, she did not see a weapon. She saw a creature who had been denied the chance to be what he truly was for most of his life. A caretaker, a guardian, someone who protected not because he was told to, but because something inside him ached to. Elena drew in a slow breath, her mind already racing through risk assessments, barrier designs, emergency protocols. All right, Titan, she said quietly, resting her hand against the top of his massive head. Let's see if the world is ready for the strangest family it's ever seen. By the time the staff assembled in the conference room the next morning, Elena had already been awake for hours. Spreadsheets flickered across her laptop screen. Risk mitigation plans, contingency protocols, sedation dosages calculated by weight for 3 different species, bear, dog, and human. It felt more like planning a spacewalk than an animal introduction. One misstep could send everything spinning into chaos. The whiteboard at the front of the room showed 2 names in bold marker, Elias and Nola. Critical. Mara, Dr. Singh, the senior keepers, and the operations manager all took their seats, coffee mugs clutched like talismans. They knew something unusual was coming. Elena only called full-team briefings when the situation had gone beyond the normal parameters of rescue work. She didn't waste their time. You've all seen the reports, she began, bringing up photos of Elias curled around Nola on the screen. Medically, we're doing everything we can. Nola is stable but fragile. Elias is physically capable of improving, but he's refusing to eat properly, refusing to engage, and any attempt to separate them triggers severe stress responses. We're in a spiral we can't break with standard methods. Are you saying we should sedate him more frequently? The operations manager asked. Tube feed, maybe? And confirm his belief that every time humans get close, something frightening happens? Dr. Singh interjected gently. We'll keep them alive, but we may lose their trust completely. These cubs will never go back to the wild. Their future is sanctuary, educational programs, constant human proximity. If we teach them to associate us only with fear, we're building a lifetime prison for their minds, not a refuge. Elena tapped to the next slide. A new image filled the screen. Titan lying beside the enclosure of a trembling, rescued husky, his massive body forming a barrier between the dog and the open space, his eyes half closed in patient watchfulness. I'm proposing an intervention that will sound unconventional, she said. But I'm asking you to listen all the way through before you tell me I've finally lost my mind. The room stayed silent. She outlined her plan, a controlled introduction between Titan and the bear cubs, with multiple layers of barriers and escape routes, constant monitoring, and clear conditions under which the attempt would be aborted. Titan would never be in a position to physically reach them without human override. The first sessions would happen through reinforced mesh, scent and sound only, then gradual visual contact, then supervised proximity. And the goal? Mara asked quietly, though Elena could see the spark of hope already flickering in her eyes. The goal is co-regulation, Dr. Singh answered. We need something or someone the cubs can trust without the same baggage they assign humans. Titan's track record with stressed animals is extraordinary. He does things no training program has explicitly taught him. If he can occupy the role of safe presence, we might be able to build a bridge between their trauma and our care. But they're bears, the operations manager objected, frowning. We're not talking about a nervous house cat. One day they'll outweigh him, outrun him, outclaw him. Even as cubs, they have teeth sharp enough to do serious damage. What happens if they decide he's a toy? Or a threat? That's why we start with distance, Elena replied calmly. Barriers. Observation. We will not force interaction. We will invite curiosity and see what they do. If there's any sign of fear aggression, we stop. Immediately. The point is not to create a circus act. The point is to see whether a traumatized dog and two traumatized cubs recognize something familiar in each other. Silence stretched. Somewhere in the building, a parrot shrieked. Someone's phone buzzed and was quickly silenced. Finally, Mara leaned forward, her expression steady. We're already losing them, she said. If we do nothing, Nola might pull through physically, but Elias will fade. Or he'll survive with wounds, so Deep will spend the next 15 years undoing them. If we have a chance, any chance, to give them a different kind of anchor, she glanced at the image of Titan on the screen and gave a small nod. I'm in. One by one, the others followed. There were conditions, stipulations, a mountain of paperwork. But beneath the bureaucracy was something simpler. Trust. They trusted Elena, Dr. Singh, and, surprisingly to some of them, the enormous dog snoring softly outside the conference room door, as if he already knew his name was being discussed. Preparation for the first session took the rest of the day. A small adjoining room next to the Cubs' quarantine enclosure was cleared and reinforced. Double doors were checked, locks tested, emergency gates oiled. A heavy steel mesh panel was installed along one wall, creating a safe, see-through barrier between Titan's side and the Cubs. When everything was ready, the staff gathered in the observation corridor. Cameras were turned on, audio levels tested, sedatives placed within arm's reach, though everyone silently hoped they would remain untouched. Inside the Cubs' room, Elias lay where he always did, wrapped around Nola like a living shield. Nola's breathing had improved slightly, but she was still slow to respond, her eyelids fluttering only when a keeper touched her. A bowl of fresh formula sat untouched in one corner. The second session looked, on paper, very similar to first. Same room, same mesh barrier, same strict time limit and emergency protocols. The difference was in the way Titan walked in, more purposeful, as if yesterday's brief encounter had given him new data to process, and in the way Elias waited. He was already awake when Titan's paws thudded softly outside the door, his small ears rotating toward the sound. This time, he didn't have to be coaxed away from Nola. He rose, hesitated for only a heartbeat, then tottered toward the mesh like a child peeking out from behind a curtain. Titan settled in his now familiar position, lying down, head low, gaze soft, body angled, so he was parallel to the cub rather than directly facing him. But today, he added something new. As Elias pressed his nose to the mesh again, Titan let his great tongue flick out once, gently, leaving the faintest trace of moisture on the cold metal. The scent that carried through was richer now, saliva, warmth, and the ghost of meals long past. Elias recoiled slightly at the unexpected wetness, then crept forward again, curiosity wrestling with caution. He snuffled, huffed, then made a small sneeze that startled him and sent him stumbling backward, which in turn made Titan's tail give an involuntary wag of amusement. From behind the glass, Dr. Singh scribbled furiously in her notebook. "He's matching," she murmured. When Elias startles, Titan modulates. When Elias approaches, he adds a new stimulus, just enough to keep engagement, not enough to overwhelm. The sessions became a daily ritual. The staff adjusted their schedules around them, as if a new, unspoken center of gravity had formed in the rescue's routine. On the fourth day, something remarkable happened. Elias was at the mesh as soon as Titan entered. Small nose pressed so firmly against the metal that his whiskers bent. Titan approached with measured steps, then lay down even closer than before, his massive head nearly level with Elias's. For a few long moments, they simply breathed the same air, separated by a few centimeters of steel and a world of species history. Then Titan shifted his gaze past Elias to where Nola lay, still weak but more responsive now. Her eyes tracked movement more regularly, and she had even made a few weak attempts to lift her head when keepers entered. Titan exhaled a low, thoughtful sound, and then did something that made Elena's breath catch. He turned his head slightly and pressed his nose not to the mesh in front of Elias, but to the section closest to Nola's side of the room. The little female bear did not move at first. Then, as warmth spread to the steel and a new scent threaded to familiar ones, her nostrils twitched. Her eyelids fluttered. Elias looked back and forth between his sister and the dog, torn, until Titan gave a soft waft that was almost encouraging. "Is he inviting him to bring her?" Mara whispered, unable to stop herself. Elias, with the solemn determination of someone taking on a task far too big for his tiny body, turned and shuffled back to Nola. He nudged her with his nose, then with his head, making soft, frustrated chirps when she only stirred weakly. Eventually, he gave up on moving her entirely and did the only thing he knew how to do. He curled behind her and began to push, using his entire body to gently slide her straw pallet a few inches closer to mesh. The effort exhausted him quickly. He managed to move her bed less than half a meter before collapsing beside her, panting. But the message was clear enough. Titan responded by lowering his head fully to the floor, bringing his nose level with where Nola's faint scent drifted through. "Shared focus," Dr. Singh murmured, her voice thick with a mixture of awe and professional excitement. "He's expanding the social circle. First, he built dyadic trust with Elias. Now he's including Nola. This is beyond what we see in most interspecies interactions, let alone interspecies." If Titan understood the academic significance of his actions, he didn't show it. He simply kept showing up day after day, doing what felt right. Some days he was more playful, a gentle paw placed against a mesh, a soft rumble that made Elias bounce backward and then forward again in a clumsy game of, now you see me, now you don't. Other days, when Nola struggled or Elias's anxiety spiked for reasons only bear cubs understand, Titan became stillness itself, a silent anchor who seemed content to simply exist in their orbit. The first time Nola managed to stand and walk, wobbly, uncertain steps that ended in her collapsing in a heap right in front of the mesh, Titan's tail thumped so hard against the floor that the sound echoed. "There it is," Elena whispered, unable to stop the grin that broke across her face. He's proud of her. Feeding began to change as well. Up to that point, keepers had been feeding the cubs by hand as much as they could, coaxing them with gentle voices and carefully warmed formula. But Elias still resisted, nibbling just enough to get by, as if any act of comfort or contentment felt like a betrayal of what he had lost. On the 9th day of sessions, Mara walked into the quarantine room at the end of Titan's visit and placed 2 shallow bowls of milk closer to the mesh than usual. Titan remained in his position, watching through the bars as Elias eyed the bowls suspiciously. The little bear glanced at Titan, then at the food, then back again. It was as if he were checking whether approaching something pleasurable in this strange new world was allowed. Titan dipped his head toward the section of mesh closest to food, huffed once, and then looked away, feigning a studied disinterest that didn't fool anyone. His body language said what no human language could. "It's all right. I've seen worse things than milk. You're safe." Elias took a step. Another. He sniffed at the bowl, hesitated, then finally, blessedly, began to lap the formula in small, cautious sips. On the other side of the mesh, Titan closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring a victory that belonged to both of them. From that day on, feeding was done primarily during Titan sessions. When he was present, both cubs ate more. When he wasn't, their intake dropped. The graphs on their charts, the ones that had been all downward arrows and dire annotations, began to curve slowly upward. The staff started calling Titan the nanny in half-joking tones, the nickname spreading through the rescue's internal chat channels along with blurry photos and short video clips. The clips showed a 200-pound Cane Corso lying like a living mountain beside a steel mesh wall, and on the other side, 2 small bears gradually unfolding from their ball of grief to explore the world again. It did not take long for those clips to spill beyond Linden Ridge's walls. Volunteers shared them with friends. Friends shared them with family. Within 2 weeks, a local news station requested permission to run a short segment on the odd family forming in the mountains. Elena hesitated at first. Publicity could bring donations, yes, but it could also bring misunderstanding, oversimplification, and pressure to perform the strange new bond forming under their care. In the end, she agreed under strict conditions. No flash photography, no loud TV crews in the quarantine corridor, filming only through the observation window, and only if Titan showed no signs of discomfort. The segment aired on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, the rescue's email inbox was overflowing. Messages had come from all over the world. Donors, fellow rescuers, animal behaviorists, children sending hand-drawn pictures of a giant gray dog with 2 tiny bears sleeping on his back. One email in particular stood out. It was from a researcher at European University specializing in cross-species social behavior, requesting permission to observe and help formally document what was happening at Linden Ridge. "This is more than a feel-good story," the researcher wrote. "This is data. This is expanding our understanding of attachment, caregiving, and trauma recovery across species. You have something very rare there." Elena read the message twice, then looked up from her laptop. Outside her office window, she could see Titan being led toward the quarantine wing, his gait steady, his ears forward. "Rare," she murmured. "Or maybe it's common and we just don't give animals a chance to show us." Either way, one thing was clear. What had begun as a desperate experiment was becoming something larger, an unexpected family forming at the edge of a snowy forest, rewriting the rules of what it meant to heal. Spring came slowly to the mountains, reluctant at first, then all at once. Snowmelt swelled the streams, icy water singing over stones that had slept beneath ice for months. Grass pushed through thawing earth, a soft wash of green creeping up the hillsides. Inside Linden Ridge, change came too. The quarantine sign was replaced with a new one, Bear Cub Complex, authorized personnel only. The air in the wing no longer smelled primarily of antiseptic and fear. It held warmer scents now. Straw, milk, the faint sweetness of fruit pulped into enrichment toys. Elias had tripled in size. His legs were longer, his paws comically big, promising the power he would one day have. Nola, though still smaller than her brother, had caught up in strength and curiosity. She no longer lay limp on her straw bed. She climbed. She wrestled. She ambushed caretaker boots with enthusiastic pounces that startled more than hurt. Through all of it, Titan remained a constant. The barrier between them had changed over time. The heavy mesh wall had given way, after countless careful assessments, to a double gate system that allowed controlled, fully supervised physical contact in a neutral adjoining playpen. The first time the gates opened and Titan stepped into the shared space, every muscle in the observation team's bodies went taut. Sedatives were ready. Recall commands drilled relentlessly into Titan's training were on everyone's tongue. They never needed them. Elias barreled toward Titan with the clumsy enthusiasm of a toddler, then skidded to a halt a meter away, sudden shyness overtaking momentum. He rose onto his hind legs briefly, sniffing the air, then dropped back down. Nola hung back at first, peeking out from behind a climbing structure, eyes wide. Titan lowered himself immediately, shrinking his imposing frame until he was belly down on the floor, head resting between his paws. It transformed him from a looming presence into something resembling an oversized, patient rug. Elias took the invitation without knowing the word for it. He crept forward, tentatively touching Titan's shoulder with his nose. The dog remained perfectly still, only his tail giving away the joy that shook his whole body. When Nola finally mustered the courage to approach, she stumbled and bumped into Titan's flank. He didn't flinch. He simply turned his head slightly and gave her the gentlest of licks on the ear. From that day forward, schedules shifted again. Titan's official role was updated in the staff database from resident dog to behavioral support animal or sign unit. It was a joke at first, but the more they watched him work, the more accurate it felt. He taught by example, not by lectures. The cubs learned that loud noise did not always mean danger when Titan walked calmly toward a drop bucket instead of bolting. They learned that human hands could bring comfort when he leaned into scratches and massages from keepers, eyes half closed in contentment. They learned boundaries when their rough play made him huff and turn away, signaling that claws too sharp and teeth too enthusiastic meant the game was over. He tolerated their climbing with stoic patience. Elias discovered that Titan's tail, heavy and muscular, made an excellent, if occasionally moving, chew toy. Nola realized that burrowing her head under Titan's chest was the fastest way to fall asleep. His heartbeat and steady breathing a sound not unlike the one she barely remembered from curling against her mother's side. There were, of course, rules. Titan was never left unsupervised with the cubs. Their sessions had defined time limits. As they grew larger, new safety protocols were added. The staff was not naive. They understood that the day would come when play swats could carry the weight of a hammer blow. But they also understood something less measurable. That for these particular bears, raised by humans and a dog in an artificial forest of fences and scheduled meals, psychological safety was as crucial as any physical barrier. The outside world continued to watch, fascinated. Documentaries were filmed, articles written. Scientists submitted papers with titles like Cross-Species Attachment and Trauma Recovery in Captivity, a case study of Ursus arctos cubs, and Canis lupus familiaris, Cane Corso. School children wrote letters addressed to Titan, Elias, and Nola, some containing serious questions. Do you think the bears know Titan is a dog? And some simply promising, in wobbly handwriting, to always recycle and never litter, so wild bears would be safe. Donations poured in. For the first time in years, Linden Ridge's budget spreadsheet glowed green, instead of teetering on the edge of red. New enclosures were planned. Staff were hired. A small educational center was built, where visitors could learn about wildlife rescue, trauma science, and the complicated ethics of captive care. In all of this noise, Titan remained profoundly uninterested in fame. The cameras meant nothing to him. What mattered were the two creatures who had, without warning, become his responsibility. He was there when Nola climbed her first tree in the outdoor exercise pen, a carefully constructed structure of logs and platforms. She made it halfway up before freezing, uncertain how to get down. Her distress call, a high-pitched whine, brought both Elias and Titan running. Elias circled below, chirping encouragement, while Titan sat at the base of the tree, head tilted, making soft noises until she finally gathered the courage to scramble down and land squarely against his broad shoulder. He was there when Elias, now almost as big as a large dog, misjudged his strength and knocked over a metal water trough in a burst of play energy. The crash echoed like gunfire in the enclosed space. Old terror flooded the cub's body. He bolted toward the corner, breathing hard, eyes wild. Instead of chasing him, Titan moved slowly, placing himself between Elias and the overturned trough. He sniffed it, nudged it upright with one heavy paw, then drank casually from it, as if demonstrating that the monster was nothing more than an object that made loud noises when provoked. It took 3 minutes for Elias to inch back toward the trough, watching Titan's relaxed posture. When he finally dipped his own muzzle to drink, the tension in the entire observation team's bodies eased. By late summer, a new question loomed. What next? Traditionally, orphan bear cubs who grew up in rescues face one of two futures: careful rewilding in a remote area, or permanent sanctuary in a large, secure habitat. For Elias and Nola, the decision was complicated by their deep reliance on Titan and their intense imprinting on humans. Sending them into the wild would almost certainly mean sending them to their deaths or to dangerous interactions with people. We can't just keep them in a small pen for the rest of their lives, the operations manager said during one planning meeting, rubbing his temples. They need space, complexity, a social structure. They're bears, not oversized dogs. We can give them space, Elena replied, tapping a new blueprint spread across the table. It showed a sprawling, forested habitat carved into the hillside, complete with climbing structures, pools, denning areas, and controlled access points. Complexity we can build. As for social structure, she glanced at the open door, where Titan's massive silhouette dozed just outside, always close to wherever the cubs happened to be. They're already building one in their own way. The solution came from a partnership proposal, a larger wildlife park, with expansive bear habitats and a dedicated research wing, offered to collaborate. They would help fund the construction of a new, semi-natural enclosure at Linden Ridge, specifically tailored for permanently captive bears with special needs. In return, they would have access to long-term observational data on the trio's interactions. It's not a zoo exhibit, Elena emphasized more to herself than anyone else. It's a home designed around what they've already told us they need. Construction began before winter returned. As machines rumbled in the distance and trees were transplanted carefully into the newly fenced area, Titan watched on the hill beside the cub's temporary outdoor pen. Elias and Nola pressed against the mesh beside him, noses twitching at the smell of fresh earth and cut lumber. They could not know the words humans used: habitat, enclosure, budget, research. They knew only that the world on the other side of the hill was changing, and that wherever they went next, the enormous gray dog who smelled of safety and old scars would be there too. The day they moved into the new habitat dawned clear and cool, with a thin mist curling around the pines. Staff gathered quietly along the perimeter, clipboard in hand, radio earpieces crackling with last-minute checks. Cameras were in place, not for spectacle this time, but for documentation. Ethograms, movement patterns, social interactions. For the three animals at the center of it all, it was simply a day when doors opened in a way they never had before. The gate from the holding pen swung wide. Beyond it lay a world of trees, boulders, shallow streams, and hidden dens, all within high, nearly invisible fencing that blended into the forest. Birds already used the branches. Wild squirrels darted along the outer perimeter, chattering angrily at the intrusion. Elias stepped out first, larger now than Titan had been when he arrived at the rescue. His coat was thick and glossy, the shadow of highway salt long gone. He lifted his head, drawing the sense of damp earth, sap, and cold water. Behind him, Nola hesitated, one paw hovering. Titan walked between them, a gray monolith aging gracefully, the fur around his muzzle now flecked with white. He bumped Nola gently with his shoulder, then padded forward at a calm, deliberate pace. They move as a unit, bear, dog. To an outsider, it would have looked almost absurd, like a scene from a children's storybook. To those who had watched their journey from the beginning, it was simply the most natural thing in the world. Elias found the stream first. He plunged his paws into the water, snorting at the cold, then splashed with growing enthusiasm. Nola discovered a fallen log, rich with beetles and moss, and attacked it with intense concentration, sending with chips flying. Titan made a slow circuit of the perimeter, nose to the ground, mapping every inch the way he always did when entering a new space. Only once he was satisfied did he lie down on a sun-warmed rock where he could see both cubs. Time smoothed the edges of their story. The media eventually moved on to other viral marvels. New rescues arrived at Linden Ridge. Injured owls, frightened foxes, an elderly wolf dog who had spent his life on a chain. Titan extended his quiet influence to them all as much as his aging body allowed. Elias and Nola grew into full-size bears, powerful and confident within the bounds of their forest sanctuary. Their play became rougher, their wrestling matches sending thuds to the ground that staff felt in their boots. But even as their strength increased, a strange courtesy remained whenever Titan was near. They toned down their force around him, as if some part of them still saw the enormous dog they had once regarded as a mountain, not realizing they had surpassed his size. Years later, visitors allowed into the viewing bunker, a low, hidden structure with one-way glass at the edge of the habitat, would sometimes see a sight that made them forget to breathe for a moment. In the golden light of late afternoon, two massive brown bears would be sprawled in the grass, one on her back, paws in the air, the other chewing idly on a branch. Between them, pressed comfortably against a flank like a child nestled between parents on a couch, would lie a huge gray dog, white whiskers catching the sun, eyes half closed in contentment. Children would whisper, faces press a glass. "Is he their dad?" The guides, carefully trained not to anthropomorphize too much, would smile and say, "He's their companion, their protector, their friend. He helped raise them when they had no one else." And in the scientific papers that continued to emerge in the Institute for Cross-Species Relationships that Linden Ridge had unofficially become, the language was more clinical but no less awed. They documented caregiving behaviors from Titan toward the cubs, and later from the adult bears toward Titan as he aged. Shared resting, mutual grooming, protective posturing when unfamiliar humans approached the fence. One particularly striking observation came near the end of Titan's life. By then, his joints ached in the cold, and the steepest slopes of the habitat were harder to climb. On those days, he favored the flatter ground near the stream. More and more often, when keepers came to check on him, they found Elias and Nola there too, even when there were plenty of tempting climbing structures and hidden dens farther away. On one occasion recorded by a remote camera, Titan attempted to stand and stumbled, his back legs failing him for a moment. Before any human could respond, Elias moved in, positioning his body alongside Titan's flank, so the dog could lean against him. Nola hovered on the other side, pacing anxiously, her massive head lowered to Titan's level, as if searching his face for signs of distress. The footage was played and replayed at conferences, often accompanied by words like empathy, reciprocity, and bidirectional caregiving. But for those who had known them from the start, it was simpler than that. It was family, doing what family does when one of their own begins to fade. When Titan finally passed, it was in his sleep, on a bed layered with blankets that smelled of the clinic, the cubs, and 1,000 gentle hands that had touched him over the years. Staff took shifts sitting with him in the days leading up to it, murmuring gratitude for everything he had done that could not fit neatly into any chart. Afterward, for several days, Elias and Nola were quieter. They paced the fence line near the clinic more often, sniffing the air as if trying to locate a scent that had always been there before. They returned again and again to the rock where Titan had liked to lie in the sun, settling there for long stretches, bodies pressed together more closely than usual. Grief, the staff realized, was not a human invention. It was a language written in absence and repeated visits to places that had become sacred simply because of who used to occupy them. A memorial plaque was placed near the habitat fence, where visitors could read it before entering the viewing bunker. It was small and simple, engraved with only a few words. Titan, who showed us that family is chosen and that love is bigger than species. The years continued their quiet work. New orphan animals arrived. Some stayed briefly. Some, like Elias and Nola, stayed forever. The bear pair grew old themselves, therefore silvering at the muzzle. They had never known a true wild forest without fences, but within the world available to them, they had known something just as rare: safety, purpose, and a bond that defied every expectation. Some evenings, when the sun slanted low and the shadows among the trees grew long, staff could swear they saw it again. Two large shapes moving through the grass with a ghost of the third between them, a memory of steady pause and a heartbeat that had once anchored their world. For the viewers watching from around the globe, through documentaries, online clips, children's books spun from their story, the trio became a symbol of something quietly radical, that sometimes the ones who have been hurt the most become the most capable of healing others, that strength can choose gentleness, that a 200-pound Cane Corso and 2 abandoned bear cubs, brought together by tragedy, can build a life that is not defined by what they lost, but by what they gave each other. At Linden Ridge, life went on. Snow fell. Streams thawed. New names were written on a whiteboard in the intake barn, each one a promise. And in a forested enclosure on the hillside, where paw prints and paw pads had worn familiar paths into the earth, the odd family that had once shocked the world remained, not as an anomaly, but as proof of a quiet truth hiding in plain sight across the animal kingdom. Where there is room for patience, protection, and shared warmth, family can bloom in the most unexpected shapes.